We are storytellers by nature, sharing with others what we experience, perceive, and believe of life, our joys, adventures, our losses. We tell ourselves stories as well. Some leave us trapped by false beliefs and self-doubt. But there are also stories of persisting, exploring, and rising above. Stories of uncovering the truth, enabling powerful transformation and triumph. These are those stories. These are your stories. Hello, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Saturday, August 1st? No, August 3rd. Wow, already. My name is Zoe Muro. I'm a licensed practitioner here on the New Thought Media Network, and I am delighted to welcome you to And So It Is, Stories of Truth, Transformation, and Triumph. My ministry and my mission are to help people co-create their most authentic and most fulfilling life experience. And I am truly honored and excited to be able to bring you this show. We're here each first Saturday of the month at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. Oh, hello, Shay. Good morning. Good to have you here. Okay. Now, if this is your first time to the show, welcome. And if you're returning, welcome back. So in each episode of this show, what we're about is listening to how people like you, people like me, who have been held back by false or limiting beliefs, how we've uncovered our truth and enabling us to transform our life experience and then actually triumph because of the journey. Which brings me to today's guest, who's actually not my guest, but my guest host, because I'll be the interviewee today. So please welcome my interviewer, my daughter, Juniper Jane Jones.
Hello.
Hello, Juniper. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I would do a bio for the guest, but since I'm the guest, but we want to know something about you. So,
well, I have this great dad. His name is Zoe. I'm coming.
Okay. Now we're into the whole. There goes your credibility right there.
Oh no. Okay, I am coming to you from Arizona, where I live with my two doggies. We are looking forward to the fall, which is coming quickly, thankfully. I work in accounting at an olive mill, and I like to tap dance.
Cool. Well, thank you. A very well-rounded individual, I must say.
Thank you.
All right, Juniper.
Okay. Alrighty, Dad. I am very excited, and I think your viewers are too, to talk about your story of transformation and where it began.
Okay. Well, considering that I have lived more than 7 decades, there's a lot of ways that I have transformed in my lifetime. Today, though, I want to talk specifically about one aspect of my journey, and that is my journey with religion and spirituality. And it's my longest story of transformation for sure. Anytime that I'm going to talk about religion and spirituality, I have to be very clear about one thing, and that is that I'm speaking about my own experience. Okay, I'm not talking about what your experience is, because it might be very, very different from mine. So it's my experience, my perspective, what I understood and what I internalized. All right. So I'm not in any way trying to speak ill of anyone's beliefs or anyone's religion. Okay. So that's where I'm going to be starting from. Now, given that this is a starting point, there were definitely beliefs and ideas that I had that limited me.
Do you know where they came from?
Yeah, I believe I do. So let me, I think that there were so many that I could point to, but I want to point specifically to two, okay? Because I think that it makes the most sense with what I'm going to be talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
One is that I just didn't believe that I could in any way succeed at being a person of substance, of real value in the world. I just felt like somehow the universe had made a mistake when it created me, and someday it'll get around to rectifying it. And second, I simply did not, and I could not believe that some kind of higher power could make any kind of positive difference in my life. And, Juniper, when I look at these two things, it's funny because I never realized how much they actually go together. Mm-hmm. One kind of feeds the other one, if you will. Mm-hmm. Now, you had asked me about the origin. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's kind of a complicated or an involved story, I guess. So let me start way back in 1950. So Brooklyn, 1950. Mm-hmm. Good old US of A. I was born into a family that had emigrated from Italy early 1900s. They brought Catholicism with them because that was an important part of their identity in Sicily. Although, quite honestly, it became less and less of a calling and more of a responsibility once they settled in here. My siblings and I were baptized as Roman Catholics. We were enrolled in a Catholic grammar school, studied Catholicism, of course. Mm-hmm. At the time, the religious education that my peers and I received was really, it was more about preparing us to take the sacraments rather than, actually, how do we approach the world with a specific moral code? Mm-hmm. Unless you count the 10 Commandments. But other than that, it was really more about memorizing and giving back what it was that they gave us, primarily through the Baltimore Catechism.
Okay.
I don't know if they still use this or not, but back in the day, this was where we got our understanding of God. So the Baltimore Catechism, as I understood it, mm-hmm. presented me with this picture of a God who is, first of all, outside of me, required an intermediary, like a priest, right? Mm-hmm. So that I could truly be involved, engaged with him being God, because God was the Father. Mm-hmm. And what else did I learn? I learned that you had to play by God's rules as expressed by the Catholic Church and verified by the Pope, or you were in danger of being doomed to eternal damnation.
Yikes.
Yeah. It gets worse.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I learned that I was basically insignificant and unworthy without God, and literally barred from the eternal happiness of heaven unless I was a baptized Catholic. Now, again, I'm expressing what I believe I was taught, mm-hmm. and how I internalized it. Now, my parents really didn't help very much at all with this. I don't know how much you remember, but my mother went to church for weddings,
Mhm.
funeral, Easter Sunday, and Christmas. And other than that, the only other time I ever remember her speaking about God or religion was if there was like some really huge storm and we were all kneeling in the living room and praying to be spared.
Okay.
That was it. My father went to church when my mother dragged him there.
Mhm.
But then at some point in the 60s, the late 1960s, he became interested in this newly reestablished role in the Catholic Church called a deacon. And now suddenly the church became everything to him, was his primary focus. I wouldn't even say it was a focus. I would say it was something that consumed him.
Hmm.
And he took on this very strange persona, like he suddenly became somehow this holy person, at least in the way that he interpreted it. Now, alongside of all of this was the numerous forms of abuse that he inflicted on the family, which I really don't want to enumerate here.
Okay. That's
But
fair.
suffice it to say, any one of them would be not only morally reprehensible,
Mm-hmm.
but even criminal.
Oh boy.
So this was the dichotomy that I was growing up with.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most bizarre twists in my religious upbringing was that I was always expected to become a priest. And I say it's bizarre because my parents believed that if I became a priest, somehow that's going to set them up with God.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So apparently, not only did you have to avoid displeasing God, but you could make side deals.
Oh boy.
Yeah, you can get advantages. Well, in deference to my parents, I actually did attend the minor seminary, which was essentially 4 years of high school.
Okay.
And that was mostly to keep my parents from sending me off to military school or something, since they thought I was a total slacker. But there was no way I was going to commit to going to the major seminary and going into the priesthood. Things did start to shift for me, though, which was getting kind of interesting. Because the best part of the education I did receive in the prep seminary was the comparative study of religions.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, it opened my eyes to seeing that there are parallels in different religions, like the idea of the virgin birth.
Mm-hmm.
In places where religion and spirituality just sort of seem to break off from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I saw these things and the more I spoke about them at the seminary, the more trouble I got into.
Oh, of course. I'm not surprised.
I mean, come on, we were created by the one being, eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful. But by virtue of being human, we were doomed because of original sin, unless we found salvation. We were all created by God, but clearly God had favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow slavery was acceptable. It's like, huh?
Right.
I remember as a boy asking what would happen to a friend of mine. This wonderful old man from the neighborhood, wasn't a Catholic, Baptist, as a matter of fact. And I said, what's going to happen to him when he dies? I was told, no, he's not going to go to heaven because he wasn't baptized as a Catholic. So I was told the same thing was true of every person, regardless of the goodness of their heart and the openness of the spirit, if they were not baptized. And I remember saying, but that's not fair.
Right.
The response I got from that was, it's not about fair. It's about what is just. So my opinion of God for a good part of my earlier years was God was not someone I felt in any way compelled to spend time with. Let me put it that way.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay. Now, not going to label myself as a recovering Catholic because I don't really feel that I was victimized
Mm-hmm.
simply by having been brought up in that faith. Was I force-fed a whole lot of things I couldn't accept? Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, as soon as I could express myself freely, I did. And I have to say that a tremendous benefit I did receive from dealing with all of this religion-inspired confusion was it sparked this desire to understand. And it really ignited my desire to connect and to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I was going to set my sights on. Although it did take a couple of cosmic 2x4s to the head.
That sounds like a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So this part of my story is kind of challenging to address because it intertwines a variety of aspects of my life that in and of each one in and of its own right could probably be its own story of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all interconnected, so I need to talk about it a bit at least.
Okay.
So the first occurred when I was only 9 years old. It's when I was attacked by a priest, which most certainly explains at least part of my issues with the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Considering that they have exhibited a propensity for hiding these offenses. Needless to say, my parents thought when I did bring it up to them that I was either hallucinating or I was losing my mind. And I was told never, ever to speak so badly of such a saintly man. Fortunately for me, my parents showed me exactly how to deal with this obvious cognitive dissonance. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
here she's telling me this is this wonderful holy man, and I'm like, no, you don't understand what he did.
Yeah.
Right. So I needed to address this, and
Mm-hmm.
I followed suit from what I had seen. We modeled for our children. So I started drinking alcoholically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, at the age of 9. And that was the beginning of my second cosmic 2x4. So from the age of 9 until about 30,
Okay.
I lived this strange parallel existence in which I attempted to live normally, or at
Mm-hmm.
least the impression that I was living normally, while I did everything I could possibly do to anesthetize myself. So for the most part, I was successful in hiding my addiction,
Mm-hmm.
but it got worse as I added in this cornucopia of drugs,
Oh boy.
from amphetamines and barbiturates to angel dust, opium, PCP, cocaine. I used alcohol, I think, as my source of sustenance because it had calories. So I became very, very good at lying,
Mm-hmm.
very good at hiding, which is probably the only reason I wasn't fired from my job. It was a very technical and a very demanding job, but I figured two things out. One, if I had multiple offices, it would be really harder to pin me down, so nobody would necessarily know where I was.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. And two, despite all the poisons that I was polluting my body with, I was still pretty smart, and I could get my work done. And I could even get it done well, even in this compromised state. What I thought, what I said, what I did, it just didn't seem important in this very strange state of mind that I found myself in. What was important was what I said and what I did, and how it was received, how it was viewed, and what was the outcome. In other words, did I get away with it? So that was my life. That was this incredible house of cards that I had built. And as is the case for every house of cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it did fall apart. Physically, I was wasting away. I had problems with my intestines, with my stomach, with my liver, with my kidneys, with my heart. And, I didn't tell anybody about any of this for years.
Wow.
When I finally did reach out for help, no, that's not right. When I was finally willing to accept the help that had been repeatedly extended to me, that was the beginning of what I think of as my spiritual renaissance.
Ah, okay.
A literal rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a really interesting road. So it started with my being tricked into seeing this guy that would become my first sponsor, this guy, Jimmy.
Okay.
Jimmy turned out to be a police officer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I didn't know that until after I had spilled my guts to him about using and dealing. And he very calmly explained that if I didn't get help immediately, he was going to bust me.
Oh my goodness.
There was no way I was going to win that case.
Oh boy.
So this very scared, very angry, very sick young man walked into his very first 12-step meeting.
Okay.
I remember that night as if it were yesterday. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of this church. It was very dark. It was stormy. It kind of looked like a horror movie.
Oh, it sounds scary.
Yeah. But I told Jimmy that, I was going to go. I was going to go to the meeting. I was going to get signatures, because if I didn't, I was in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I go into this meeting. What's the first thing I noticed? I noticed these people are all freaks. Not me. I didn't belong there.
Of course not.
And then they prayed the serenity prayer. Oh, man. God was in this. He read the 12 steps, and I was really in trouble because God was all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found intriguing, after a few meetings, and I only continued to go because Jimmy was there. He was just reminding me. But the thing that really intrigued me after a while was in the last step of the 12 steps, it begins with the phrase, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps.
Mm-hmm.
And that intrigued me. Spiritual, not religious, spiritual. So you're telling me that I don't have to dedicate myself to that bearded guy in the sky? No, I was stuck. It was this or rehab or prison.
Mm.
So gave it a shot.
So what were some, in the beginning, what were some of the things that kind of started opening up your eyes and kind of making you think in different directions?
Good question. First one was actually kind of silly in a way. Whenever I would talk to anybody and express my doubts about God-related stuff working for me, because I was just so, I just felt like I had really been abandoned so badly, or so badly treated by this God. Someone said, okay, so the word God's bothering you? Let's replace it. Let God stand for good, orderly direction. Or how about group of drunks? So the point was to recognize that I was working towards something, not running away from something, not hiding from something.
Okay.
That I wasn't doing this alone, that I had support and I had guidance. So being able to accept the GOD of good orderly direction or a group of drunks, I was able to work through the steps. And as I worked through them, I found that I was developing responsibility. I was developing self-efficacy, of belief in my ability to actually do things. I was receiving confirmation that I need not be a victim, but I had power and I had choice. Well, giving up my self-anesthesia of alcohol and drugs really presented me with a decidedly unpleasant side effect.
Which was?
I felt everything.
Oh, no, not the feelings.
Yeah. There were the aches and pains of withdrawal. There was the enormity of changing my entire life from being dedicated to feeding my addiction. There was the guilt and the shame that I felt for what I had not been able to do for you and your brother. The dangers that I had put you in. The idea that my entire life had been devoted to feeding my addiction. And now I was changing to being aware, because being aware allowed me to choose. And I absolutely had to choose every day, sometimes every hour. I would choose not to use a substance. In doing that, I started to learn the importance of being in the moment. Because that is where you live your life. It's not in the past as we remember it or think we remember it. It's not in some imagined future, which we often will paint as either as bleak as we could possibly imagine it, or so far out there that we have no idea how we're going to ever attain it. Right? No, the present. So after several years of doing this, I was able to address the physical damage I had done to my system. I started working with a therapist to work on the emotional damage. And then truly internalizing what I was learning, I realized there was so much more to life than simply being alive.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted that. I wanted that. I remember being in my therapist's office, and it was there. It was this particular day that I had this realization that I really wanted to truly live my life. And I burst into tears and I felt terrible. And my therapist was like, okay, tell me what's going on.
What's happening here?
And I said, well,
Yeah.
I just realized that here I am. I was over 50 years old at this point. The majority of my life is probably behind me, not in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels like kind of, I came late to the game, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, you could look at it that way, or you could make the most of each and every moment that you have going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to work. And my physical recovery from addiction led me to what I call healing modalities, right? And I became aware that there was actually like a synchronicity between the physical and the spiritual aspects of life. And that happened primarily because of things I started studying from Eastern religions and philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Buddhism, I learned an appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things, and the importance of being able to release things, not to hold on to things so tightly that it just creates tremendous havoc in your life.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
The Taoism, which got me to see that there is a harmony and an importance of going with the flow,
Mm-hmm.
all right, which is the Tao itself. Hinduism, all right, ensuring my actions are in alignment with my thoughts. All right. So I went back and forth among these different philosophies and modalities. And I was really having a hard time trying to land on one. And I think that it had something to do with the fact that I was still feeling tremendous distrust or mistrust of any kind of organized religion.
Mm-hmm. That's understandable.
So I really didn't see myself immersing myself in any of those.
Mm-hmm.
Although you could argue that they're more than religions, that they're actually more philosophies. But in any event, for some reason, it just wouldn't sync with me at that particular point in my life.
Mm-hmm. But something did to move you along. So what are some of the things that you did that, not to jump ahead, but we know where it ends with transformation. So what are some of the things that were in between that started putting pieces together for you?
Okay. Well, when I first approached sobriety, I did it because I wanted to be out of pain.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to handle my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to get rid of it, just handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But the longer I studied and I explored spirituality, the more I became fixated on the idea of being in control of my life rather than being controlled by my life.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I started this process of extricating myself from those things that no longer served me. That meant I had to let go of a lot of friends.
That's tough.
Because the reason we had so much in common was our addictions.
Mm-hmm.
There were places I stopped going to because those are the places where I made my connections.
Mm.
I started to believe that despite what had happened in my life up to this point, it wasn't too late to live the rest of my life as fully as possible if I was willing to commit to what I call co-creating my experience of life going forward. You know, I was sitting down and I was thinking about the various decades of my life, from when I first started in this this journey of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
From, I would say, from about 30 onward, each decade had some aspect of it that was kind of a marker for having reached maybe a higher vibration of life. That would be a way to put it. So in my 30s, I'm sorry, say it again.
No, I said, yeah, I hear you.
So like in my 30s, I got clean and sober.
Mm-hmm.
In my 40s, really began meaningful therapy, because I had tried therapy in the past and it was a joke. I was lying and the therapist didn't care. And
Oh no.
let's see. In my 50s,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I really addressed the effects of having been abused.
Mm.
And it was in my 50s that I really started my spiritual journey in earnest.
Mm-hmm.
In my 60s, I really started to incorporate so much more of this path of spirituality into my everyday life. So I stopped working with people on their physicality, because I've been a personal trainer and performance coach and such. And I started working instead on their spirituality.
Ah.
And in the process of doing that, I actually found a spiritual oasis for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But, and we'll get into that in a bit.
Okay.
In my 70s, I'm seeing the importance of speaking up and speaking out
Mm-hmm.
for myself, certainly, but also not to just condemn injustice,
Mm-hmm.
actually do something to ensure justice. I want to leave this world in a better state than I found it.
Okay.
I'm always amazed at the intricate ways in which my life moves. My first introduction to what I see as my way of life rather than my religion
Mm-hmm.
actually came about through this really bizarre, strange, circuitous route. It started with my personal training and performance business. Right? So I had been doing this in San Francisco at the time, and Jackie and I, my wife and I, decided that we were going to move to Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured, well, I should do some marketing on the Oakland side. And I had been introduced to a business networking group by a friend of Jackie's. And I said, well, I'm going to go to the East Bay and join a group there. That'll kickstart my client list on that side.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to that group. They introduced me to another group, and I was off to the races. One day I was discussing my own personal development with a former client, and I expressed that, at times I kind of feel like I'm dangling at the end of a rope. I'm holding on, but I'm not really feeling that I was necessarily accomplishing that much more.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted more, and I knew that there was more.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, considering what you have been doing in this journey, she said, why don't you belong to a spiritual community?
Hmm.
I'm like, well, seemed like kind of an odd question.
Yeah, coming from a business person talking about spiritual. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, I just launched into my well-rehearsed, organized religion is a problem. And she listened for a bit, and then she gently interrupted me to suggest there might very well be another way to look at this. She said that she followed something called science of mind or religious science. And I could feel the beware, cult, red warning flag launching in my psyche. Well, it took a bit of explanation, but I found out that science of mind was not a cult, but it was actually an aspect of a larger movement called New Thought. It drew from many sources that I was familiar with. In fact, I would hear the phrase New Thought, ancient wisdom. And I finally understood that many of the principles that they're talking about are traceable to philosophers from centuries ago. Hence, ancient wisdom. The New Thought was the new way of thinking about life, the new thought that I have about myself, the new thought I have about my abilities. Okay. So I was intrigued. I mean, here's something that, once again, I see the idea of spirituality rather than religion. So I was intrigued. And I was like, all right, I definitely would like more information. So she hands me this book.
Some light reading.
Okay, the definitive text for the science of mind has a subtitle that I didn't really pay attention to initially, because I just kind of leafed through a few of the chapters and I handed it back to her and I said, no, thank you. I thought the book was really kind of daunting. And she said, take a look at this. And she handed me the Science of Mind magazine. That was when the clouds disappeared. The sun shone, the birds sang. The total Disney moment. And once I actually started to read through these articles and got a better sense of what this was about, I was like, okay, now I can go back and I can look at the book, which is a good thing because the subtitle of this book is perfect. It's a philosophy, a faith, a way of life. Right? That's what I had been looking for. So a few days after our discussion, I found myself in a strangely familiar position. There I was sitting in my car, trying to get it together and walk into another church. What was I getting myself into? Oh no. I remember I felt both anxious and profoundly sad. The anxiety, no surprise. The sadness, that was actually, I think, fear that I needed something to open me up and I could feel that I was in danger of shutting down again. So if this didn't work, well, the old thought patterns did their damnedest to reemerge and to dominate, but I simply ignored them, did my best imitation of the invisible man, and I sat as far back in the church as you could possibly do, and basically cried through the whole service. Not out of sadness, but because what I heard, what I felt was exactly what I needed in that moment. The music, the prayers, the lesson, the minister, the whole energetic vibe of the experience, it just felt so right. And for those moments, I felt this surge within me. I felt this resonance. Despite my attempts to sneak in and out without actually talking to another human being, people did greet me very warmly and invited me to come back. And it didn't feel like a cult.
Good.
Time will tell.
Right.
I do have to say that I surprised myself because I went back the following week, and except for traveling or illness, I was there every week, soaking it all in and feeling that need to understand more. I was hearing about a very different higher power than the one I grew up with, and even the one I found in 12-stepping. I took classes, lots of classes, and I read, and I dove into the internet. And let me tell you, my Google searches, I went down more rabbit holes than any rabbit in existence. And I found that I was going back hundreds, even thousands of years in terms of the teachings. I also get the wisdom of the sages throughout time across philosophical and religious boundaries. Think about a time when you ate something that was really delicious. It was the very first time you ever had it. You didn't know it even existed. And then you try this wonderful thing. That's what this was like for me. So having enjoyed this spiritual feast, it seemed very reasonable to learn all that I could because I could maximize my life experience. You know, if I stick with the food analogy, I enjoyed the result, but I wanted to learn how to cook it.
Right. How do I make this at home?
So several years of classes and community work later, received my license as a religious science practitioner. Because I realized that while my ill-fated seminary days were definitely nothing to celebrate, I was nevertheless still called to ministry. Prayer practitioner and a spiritual advisor, I could help spread the joy of new thought. And I could do it at a time when it was so sorely needed.
Yeah.
So where I started with all this was the belief that I was personally of no real value in the world. And that no deity was going to make my life any better. But if God is all there is, and I was created by this source of love and grace, how could I possibly be worthless?
Right.
I remember a sign I saw in a kid's classroom. I remember if it was one of your classrooms or Rob's, and there was a sign that said, "God don't make no junk." I agree. The more I was able to learn about my truth, that I was far more than my human self, that I also had a capital S self as well, that was created perfect, whole, and complete, the more I could see my path unfold before me. Although I will say that many times during this journey, I've seen a path. I started down that path, firmly believed that that was the answer, only to find that it was a different path. And that led to another path. So being able to be open to this, huge change in my possibilities in my lifetime. You know, I think of the various religions and philosophies that I had studied, and I can see that New Thought was open to embracing the concept that while there is only one truth, there are many different sources of that truth, many different avenues to that truth. And I would say, of all the ways that my life transformed, I would have to say that beyond finding that I did have value and purpose, the one thing that stands out most is this idea that I am a co-creator of my life experience. Considering how important that discovery was in my life, considering how important that is, let me say this. Let me say that I start with choice.
Okay.
When I was living my life as a victim, I knew the pain and suffering I endured, but I saw no alternatives. I saw no escape except through muting myself basically out of existence with alcohol and drugs.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that I even had a choice to make wasn't even a remote possibility. My life was what happened to me, not because of me.
Mm-hmm.
Learning that there were many ways in which my thoughts actually could hurt me physically was the first step in learning that the opposite was also true, that my thoughts could also prevent illness and even potentially heal me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while I couldn't prevent some of the circumstances or conditions I found myself in, I could choose how I would react to them. So I went from feeling powerless
Mm-hmm.
to feeling responsible and vital. I realized I get to choose how I will approach not only a condition or a circumstance, but I get to choose how I will approach my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, all I cared about was how I was going to survive until my next dose, my next drink.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can look at my life and know that I am dedicated to sharing what I have learned, assisting others in becoming who they truly are and transforming their own lives
Mm-hmm.
in ways they might only have dreamed of. I know that there are no limits to the joy that I can experience in this life other than those I choose to believe in. I also know spirituality is not something that you learn, you achieve it, and you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we access the dynamic life force itself. So I continually practice and learn and grow. I do that through meditation, through studying, working with my clients, prayer partners. I lead a discussion group. And of course, I pray with as many people as I possibly can. And currently, I'm actually in the process of finishing a book about bridging the gap between envisioning and manifesting, taking
Oh,
things from,
good.
in essence, a dream state and putting it
Uh-huh.
into reality. And that should lead to a workshop as well.
Okay.
And of course, I have this show each month.
Right. Right.
Life is good.
I agree. And I am, very excited to see, because I have my own version or my own perspective of your transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So through my 50 years, I've seen you transform and I've seen you struggle. And I remember when you started with Science of the Mind. And I remember the first thing I said was cult. And so when he said that, I was like, yeah, I had the same thought. But I have enjoyed watching your transformation and how confident you've become and how much happier you've become, and bad things happen. But, you've always seemed more grounded, and big difference that I've seen in my lifetime with you. So I think it's pretty cool that I got to be the one to do this talk with you. Yeah.
Well, I am just delighted that you were able to do this. And you did a great job, and I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, it's a comment from one of our viewers from Shay. She said, I'd like to hear Juniper's experience on a show sometime. What it's like for her to have a dad who was sick and actually got well. Blessings to you both. Thank you.
I don't remember a lot of the really bad times you were talking about before you got sober, because I was really young. I think I was only 7 or 8. So I don't remember that part. I just, I remember, I mean, I can look back as once I was a parent, I was like, oh yeah, he was struggling as a parent because it's hard to be a parent. So I can look back and see where you struggled. But at the time, it just didn't occur to me. I was just a kid. But now I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, parenting was hard back then. Like, yeah, we were on the struggle bus a couple times, but I didn't know it at the time. I just thought, this is, I'm a kid. This is life. But looking back, I was like, yeah, we got through that pretty good though. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping here.
Okay.
Folks, if you have a story of transformation, or you have taken yourself from false beliefs, the truth to transformation, I would love to have you come on the show. Okay, you can email me here, zodimuro@gmail.com, and I'll be more than happy to explain the process and how you can do that. Particularly interested in hearing from men, by the way. Oh, hi, Lori. Lori's one of our practitioners, and magnificent one at that. You're very welcome. Okay. Let's see. What else do I want to say here before I run out of time? We have tons and tons of stuff going on here on the New Thought Media Network. So give yourself the opportunity and give yourself the time to look around and see what you can find. Tomorrow's Sunday, so there's 6, 7, or 8 different Sunday services from around the country that are being shown on the New Thought Media Network. So go to ntmedia.org or go to YouTube and put in New Thought Media Network. All right. So I am looking forward to seeing you all again next month. And once again, I thank my host with the most. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to share this time. And I wish you all the most magnificent time, because you can do this. You can choose the life that you wish to lead. It's that simple and that complex. All right, folks. Let me see. I believe that we're good to go. I'll see you next week. Or next month. Namaste.